So this is the third and final plenary panel, Disrupting Sexual Violence in Marginalized Communities. I've been excited about every single panel, so but I'm excited about this panel as well. And then after, I just want to continue to just give a rundown. We will have John Jackson, who is the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication, where we're seated. He will close this portion of From No to Love, so close the one-day conference, which is here. And then we will reconvene at the African American Museum of Philadelphia at 7th and Arch at 6 p.m. with a reception with food, not chips and dip, but food. Catered by Miss Dawn's cater. So we're talking about, like macaroni and cheese, like food. So that's how we'll close From No to Love. But I just wanted to give you all that we're still going. So it is with great joy that I introduce the moderator of this panel, Dagmawi Woubshet, who I call Dag. And before I do the official blah, blah, I want to just say that I met Dag through Salamisha when they were in graduate school up in Cambridge at Harvard. It was their first year. And I think in their second year of graduate school, Dag and Salamisha put on this incredible conference. It was really, really around art and activism. And it was just really special. And so that's when I really got to know Dag and have been able to be friends with him since then. So that was we're almost on 20 years of friendship. And so he's the Ahuja Family Presidential Associate Professor of English at the University of Pennsylvania, scholar of African American literature and art. He works at the intersections of African American, LGBTQ, and African studies. He is the author of the Calendar of Loss, Race, Sexuality, Mourning in the Early Era of AIDS, in the co-edited volume, Ethiopia, Literature, Art, and Culture, a special issue of Callaloo. His other writings have appeared in various publications, including Transition, NKA, Journal of Contemporary African Art, and The Atlantic. And he is currently completing Here Be Saints, James Baldwin's late style. Is it late or late? Late style, sorry. And the English translation of, please help me with his name, please.
Sabat, the title?
Yes, is it Sabat?
Sabat Gabriel.
Oh, Sabat Gabriel? Exabria, thank you. 1966 Amharic novel, and The Seventh Angel is what he's translating. So really, and we'll let Dag take it from here, and thank you.
All right. What a privilege and what a joy it's been to be here all day, to experience this occasion, and to moderate this panel. I want to begin with a quote by Audre Lorde, which for some time was Aishah's email signature. I'm not sure it still is. It's from the Berlin Years, the documentary Audre Lorde, The Berlin Years. And Audre Lorde says, I started out like all of us start out, a coward, afraid. It is not to say that I am not afraid now. It is to say whether I'm afraid or not, I count less. I value myself more than I value my terrors. It does not mean I don't have them. Once I take that position, I can look at them and see what it is that they teach me. I want to begin this panel in that spirit. Before I introduce the esteemed presenters, just a quick word, please, on Aishah and No. I want to join the chorus of voices to thank Aishah, to celebrate her vision, her conviction, her labor. I met Aishah in 1999 through my dear friend, my best friend Salamisha Tillett, and her sister Scheherazade Tillett. And had I not met Salamisha, I think I would be a very compromised man and a very compromised queer man. And I consider myself the black feminist I am because of Salamisha, and by way of Salamisha, because I met Aishah and saw know in 1999, at such a formative time from my own queer coming of age and Black feminist coming of age and consciousness. So, and what Aishah did for me, along with Thomas Glave, these were the two people, the Jamaican-American queer author, that really corroborated my existence as other Black queer people. And in addition to the work, I used to get excited just to think about Afro-Les productions, right? That kind of corroboration, right? And watching No, it also gave me a language to think about and to give language to the Black feminism I grew up in my own family. I come from, a group of divorcees, including a mother who left her 2 children in Ethiopia in 1979 when you didn't have an Ethiopian diaspora, and left a deeply patriarchal country, a situation I used to resent. Now I celebrate. And that celebration came by engaging a film and a figure like Aishah Simmons. So I am deeply, deeply, deeply thankful to have enjoyed 20-year friendship with Aishah Simmons. Now, let me introduce the panelists for this last session, Disrupting Sexual Violence in Marginalized Communities. We have right here to my immediate left, Ahmad Greene-Hayes, who is the founder of Children of Kambahi, a faith-based organization that works to end child sexual abuse in Black church communities using womanist, queer-affirming, pastoral, and theological methods. He's also a doctoral candidate in the Department of Religion at Princeton University, in the Religion in the Americas subfield, and an interdisciplinary scholar pursuing graduate certificates in African American studies and gender and sexuality studies. Also, he's an essayist. His public commentary on issues of race, gender, sexuality, Black politics and religion have appeared in The Black Scholar, Ebony, The Root, Feminist Wire, Huffington Post, Open Democracy, and News One, among many other outlets. Then we have Janiece Mizrahi Poindexter. She's a trans woman of color and an award-winning advocate dedicated to addressing the health needs and barriers to access the many marginalized communities face in her native Detroit. For more than 10 years, she's advocated for HIV/AIDS prevention services and transgender rights in Southeast Michigan before becoming the first official transgender victims advocate to be employed by Equality Michigan. Yes. She is a founding board member of the Trans Sisters of Color Project, a member of the National LGBTQ Task Force, and the legendary House Mother of the House of Mizrahi. One of the most respected international ballroom houses among communities of color. We're also very fortunate to be joined by Ignacio G. Hushia Aiti Rivera, is the founder of the HEAL Project, which seeks to broaden the conversation about sexuality as a critical component to ending child sexual abuse. This project fosters open dialogue in the movement by promoting a healthy understanding of sexuality as a focal point of any work to end child sexual abuse, by making visible the hidden tools used to coerce and inflict guilt, shame, and violence on children. The HEAL Project's mission is to eliminate the shame and secrecy that allows abuse to occur and to continue. Next, we have Amita Swadin, has been an organizer, educator, storyteller, and strategist working to end interpersonal and institutional violence for 20 years. Their work stems from their experiences as a queer, non-binary femme, daughter of immigrants from India, and survivor of childhood rape and domestic violence in their family of origin. In 2016, Amita received a Just Beginnings Fellowships to create Mirror Memoirs, a national storytelling and organizing project uplifting LGBTQI plus people of color who survived child sexual abuse in service of ending rape culture. In 2009, Amita co-created Secret Survivors with Pink Chong Plus Company, featuring survivors of child sexual abuse, telling their stories through theater. Amita is also a published writer. They hold an MPA from NYU, where they were a Reynolds Fellow in Social Entrepreneurship. And then Scheherazade Tillett, hi Cher, is a photographer, art therapist, and community organizer. As a curator and social documentary photographer, Scheherazade uses site-specific work to explore the themes of gendered vulnerability, racial invisibility, pleasure, and play. In 2003, she co-founded A Long Walk Home, a Chicago-based national nonprofit. Yes, yes. That uses art to empower young people and end violence against girls and women. She's also the artistic director of the award-winning multimedia performance Story of a Rape Survivor, SOARS. In 2009, Scheherazade inaugurated the Girlfriends Leadership Institute, a year-long artist activist program that empowers girls and young women in Chicago to be social justice leaders in their schools, communities, and Chicago at large. So please help me welcome our panelists. Okay, so I wanted to begin with a kind of, just an open-ended question by honing in on the word marginal, which is part of the title of this plenary. And I want to ask how, just in your own work, in your own lives, how you imagine that term. And I ask because quite often, certainly in the dominant culture, marginal is a position of victimization, right? And we know how power works, of course, to render us marginal, but that position is also a place of enormous ethical commitment, political possibility. I love what Toni Morrison says, I started at the margins, claimed it as central, and had everybody move to where I was, right? So marginal to you, what does that mean in your lives and also in the extraordinary work that you all do? Yes.
I was hoping we would start on the other side, but good afternoon, everyone. I echo much of the gratitude that has been expressed to Aishah. Truly, I don't think any of us would be here in the work without Aishah. It's just been a pleasure truly to know her and to grow in the work because of Aishah, and so I'm thankful for the invitation. Marginal, I'm really glad that you brought Morrison, may she rest in peace, into the room. Morrison is such a central figure from my own work as a scholar, thinking about the ways in which we privilege the outside gaze on how we think about our own communities. And I think Morrison was very clear that she cared less about what white people thought about black people. She wanted to know what black people thought about black people. And so just thinking about the word marginal in the context of my work within black churches, the project Children of Combahee emerged out of a frustration with the ways in which the media talks about clergy sex abuse. The imagined survivor is a white child survivor of sexual violence. It is a Catholic white child. So there is no conversation about Black Catholics, Latinx Catholics, who are also survivors of clergy sex abuse. And then there is no real reckoning with the ways in which sexual violence rears its ugly head in the space of Protestant churches. So we're thinking about Baptist and Pentecostal churches, the tradition from which I came from. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse, and just wanted to really, really think deeply about how do we get Black people of faith to really reckon with the reality that survivors sit in the pew and preach in the pulpit. What do we do with that as a reality? What do we do when the harm doer is not just the male pastor, which is very common, or we have the trope of the creepy deacon, right? And these things proliferate so often. But what do we do when the harm doer is also a church mother, or a deaconess, or an evangelist? How do we deal with the ways that our religious spaces are actually enshrining safe space for widespread violation of bodies? There's so much touch that is happening. Consent is a word that we speak in the anti-violence movement. It is a word I've never heard spoken in the space of a Black church. And so what do we do when the vocabulary that we're working with in this work is actually not a part of faith communities? And so much of the work that I do is around a cultural shift in the space of Black churches, and it is also a theological project. I'm not a theologian, but I don't think we can end sexual violence in the space of Black churches without reckoning with the theology. We have to be honest that the theology, a lot of it is very bad, anti-Black, colonial theology that privileges white people. White Jesus still hangs in many churches. We have to deal with the reality that the theology demonizes Black women, even as Black women fill the pews and keep the doors open. There's so much pathology that is happening. And I must say, even as I've been doing this work for the last 4 years with churches, I am exhausted. And I sit here I think of myself as a son of the Black church tradition, but am ultimately very exhausted with working with Black churches. There is a real denial of the pervasive reality that sexual violence is happening every day. And what do we do even when progressive people who are womanist preachers, womanist theologians, Black feminist preachers also do not want to talk about sexual violence, do not want to talk about its intersections with queer sexuality, with transphobia? All of these things are connected. And so I think the word marginal is such a charged and weighty term. And I'm not sure that we will see an end to sexual violence in Black churches in particular if, in fact, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and misogyny continues to persist. So I'll stop here and pass it on. There's much more to say, but thank you.
Good afternoon. As stated earlier, my name is Janiece Mizrahi Poindexter, and I have the privilege of being the transgender specialist / victim advocate for Equality Michigan, and I'm the vice president of communication and organizing for Trans Sisters of Color Project. And the word marginalized or marginal means to me, for me, it's a two-part kind of meaning. It means other to me. That's what it represents in my life. That's what it represents in my work for my victims, for my survivors. It means other, and it means fighting the myth and the stereotype of the other. And constantly, every day, how I show up, how I produce, how I speak, how I carry myself in a space is all connected to that word, because I'm constantly fighting perception. I'm constantly fighting ideas that have been built against me with no real merit or validity to it. It's just put out there, and it is what it is. So that's what marginal means to me.
Hello. Hola, Itakahi. Okay, so when you first said, when you said marginal, I didn't think of what it meant to me. I just thought of what I felt or what I feel when I think of marginal. And literally, I don't know why, I just got this piece of paper from my partner to write some notes, but I was like, I thought of this, the line that we have on pieces of paper, the margins, right? It's so small and so insignificant, and we never even think about it, right? We have to write inside the lines, and we only have to interact with it when we cross over. So I was thinking about that, When I think of marginal, I think about it in a lot of different ways, related specifically to me, and then also, like the work that I do and who I kind of center. And so I think of, who is marginal, little girls, or little, kids, children, young people. Marginal in huge ways, because we talk about adults not having voice, children have none. And the work that I do really tries to, well, I'm not going to say I'm trying. I am creating a cultural shift. I am creating a cultural shift in how we relate to young people and children within our own families and how we talk to them, right? Because we consistently hear, and I'm going to say this bullshit, that children are our future. We hear this so much. Children are our future. Give them space to do this and do that. But we don't actually, do anything. Like, if children are literally our future, then we absolutely have to do all of this work that we're doing, especially with adult survivors and everything. We need to start with children. When we talk about sexual violence, the anti-violence movement, any kind of work, any work that is geared towards ending violence has to start with children. And I have to say, Amita, I'm constantly happy every time, not happy, that's not the right word. I am, thank you, affirming that when you say I am a survivor of childhood rape, you speak that very clearly. Nobody talks about that. We talk about childhood sexual abuse in this big bubble, but we don't actually want to think about a child, a 2-year-old, being raped. And I want people to think about that. Because when we talk about rape, it is not just adults. It is from birth to anybody who's a senior, from birth to death, that could happen, right? So that to me is so fucking marginal. It gets me so angry when we don't talk about that, and that we treat childhood sexual abuse as a childhood problem. Childhood sexual abuse is not a childhood problem. It is every part of your life problem. It happens in childhood, but it doesn't end there. And I feel other people have said this, and I'll add my voice to this too. I am literally in arguments for months right now with my own family about my survivorship. And I say, how could I do this work? How could I do this work, talk to other families, work with families to talk about the importance of talking about healthy relationships, sex, masturbation, how to say no, how to say yes, not just talk about sex as a procreative thing, but a thing that could be so fucking beautiful and also very horrible, that it has many sides to it, that we should be able to choose, all of these things. We don't express these things to children, and yet we expect kids to at one day magically, when they're 15, 16 years old or something, we teach them about sex, and we literally teach them this goes inside this, and we do this, and we love each other, and then we have babies. A heteronormative way, and then say, now go off and be an adult and be happy. Like, we're not doing anything for our kids if that is the way we are trying to raise kids. If we want to end this cycle, this epidemic, this generational thing, then we got to start right back over there, and we have to go right over to, because I'm thinking a lot about elders who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. What information do elders have that they've been holding for decades about childhood sexual abuse, that we're not even thinking about them as a vital resource to use that information, to use that with children? It's like circular, indigenous is all circular. How we have to be thinking outside of the boxes that we've created inside these institutions when we have these catchphrases and stuff. And I understand that these things start for a particular reason of that time, but we're in a different time now. So, when we say no means no, okay, I understand how that started, but that doesn't pertain right now. Like, we need to change that, because sometimes we don't have the voice to say no. But just because we didn't say it doesn't mean that our body is not telling you we don't want this to happen, right? Again, it's put on us. So I think about the marginal, it is like, it's even the way we think, the way we've made it into this little compact thing. If we do this, then we can help our children. Don't talk to strangers. If anything ever happens to you, tell me. Adults can't even tell people. How are we telling kids to come tell me? Like, I don't understand that, right? Like, maybe a child, hopefully, if they, if they have supportive parents or people in their life that can talk to them. But it's just not, that's not simple for anybody to do. So we really have to think about this process, and we need to think about not just sex education. I talk about it as holistic sexuality information because it is holistic. We have reduced sex to penis and vagina, marriage, and love. And what I'm doing is exploding that shit. And it is way bigger than that. It is way bigger than just sex. It is about how we freaking communicate with one another, how I see someone and see their humanity, how all of these things. So all of that has to do with how we actually succeed, how we succeed in life. So to me, this is more than just CSA prevention. This is about how do we have our children succeed in life, because that's about information. It's about storytelling. It's about me sharing with my own child all of my hardships and all of the beauty so that she could get all of my information and then use that for herself, and she could fall or rise with it because it's her choice and she has to make these decisions, right? So when I think of that marginal, it is first and foremost children, and I can get into trans people. I can get into being a survivor that was raped and assaulted as a girl, and then being a trans individual who's fluid, and how that kind of shapes when you are trying to heal or access spaces that are only for women. And so I've been denied over and over because I don't know why. So those are other conversations.
Because transphobia. So I'm going to invite us to take a breath. Aishah does that beautifully in the anthology. Let's just breathe for a second, please. I need that. Thank you. So my name is Amita Swadhin, and I'm just going to take a second to arrive for my ancestors to be in right relationship with so many of yours. I see lots of questions around why I am the only non-Black survivor on this panel, on this conference in a speaking role, and I just want to honor the deep trust that Aishah has gifted me with in that ask to speak here. I'm deeply humbled by it. It's interesting, we talk about circles. It's Aishah's film in 2002 when it was a work in progress being screened at Barnard that really changed my thinking around survivor storytelling. I was newly in a queer relationship with my first serious partner, who is a queer Black woman, who's also an incest survivor like myself. And we were 22 and really trying to figure out how do we navigate liberation within our love with all of this trauma and very little support and resource, very little dialogue, even in anti-sexual violence spaces around what do you do when you were raped within your family as a child, right? And so it was going to a screening of No at Barnard in 2002 that at least gave us the sense that definitely we weren't alone, but we already knew that from having gone to college and being at spaces like Take Back the Night. And there's something different in that film that is about survivors using our stories to change the culture around us, to really reflect back what society is doing to us, right? And in that society is doing to us also is implicated our families. So it's really, I owe Aishah, like so many of you, just a deep bow of gratitude, and it's been an honor to become her friend over the last 7 years. We met as colleagues. We didn't get to meet at that 2002 film screening. We met as colleagues in 2012 at a convening by the Ms. Foundation for Women of Color, and it actually was only cis women of color who were invited to that, who were child sexual abuse survivors and who are doing work to end child sexual abuse. And for the past 4 years, we've been in the Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellowship together, along with Ignacio and Ahmad. So it's just a great honor and a privilege to be here. And thank you to the South Asia Center of the University of Pennsylvania for sponsoring my partnership here, because God knows my people are not always in right relationship with Black liberation. So that's nice to see. Thank you. I want to talk about this question of marginality. I don't really love to talk about my work in that frame. I really much prefer to talk about oppression. I think that as a student of Black feminism, and specifically queer Black feminism, for a long time now, it was the words of June Jordan, in college, when it was assigned to me, her poetry was assigned to me in a women's studies class, and I was a student of international politics, so I didn't get to take that many women's studies classes, and when I did, the ones that were cross-listed that would actually count for me, and I was a scholarship kid, so I don't have room to take that many electives, right? It was mostly Global South feminists who were talking about colonial violence when I would take classes on violence against women, and that was important, but none of the classes that I took at that time actually had to deal with being raped in your home by your father, which was my story, right? And my rape started when I was 4 and continued kind of all the time until I was 12. And then there was state intervention in my house when I was 13 through mandated reporting, which was awful and very much about white people and their violence. And it was very unwelcome. And I know that that is a shared experience for too many of us in this room. So I also consider myself a survivor of state violence. And when I think about oppression and its relationship to marginality, I think about our history, I think about our culture, and I especially think about our institutions and the nation state, and the way that our culture is then woven into, weaponized into violence through the impetus or the mechanisms of the state, right? And that happens all over the world, but this year is the 50th anniversary of my particular tiny little family being in the United States. And a lot of people who are in my own diaspora ask me, why don't you do more work in a South Asian context? And I say, well, because I'm South Asian American. Like, my mom was 10 when she came here. She was raised in Cleveland Heights from 1969 onwards. So I don't really know. I mean, we grew up working class, and I can't really afford a trip back to India. And when most people went to visit their grandmothers in South Asia proper, I went to Ohio, because that's where my grandma lived. And I grew up in Queens and in northern New Jersey. So I grapple every day with what it means to be this descendant of settlers in a colonial project, and what it means to find liberation within this context. Of course, I have to look to Black, queer, and indigenous queer feminists for that context, because I am subject to the same violence of the same nation state that has been oppressing your people ever since white people came to this land. So I thank you for the hundreds of years of resistance and writings and organizing work that I have learned so much from. And I would offer Mirror Memoirs, the reason I chose to focus on specifically Black and indigenous, transgender, non-binary, and intersex people and other people of color who fit those identities, and then also include queer, cisgender, Black and indigenous people and other people of color, all of whom have been raped or sexually assaulted as children, is because after 25 years in anti-violence so-called movements and organizations, who I continue to see at the table creating policy and creating cultural change and creating spaces where healing can happen and creating places where language can come through, is almost exclusively cisgender women. And I understand how that happens, because for a long time, I didn't understand that I am a non-binary person. It's trans people who gave me the language for that, and especially trans youth. Shout out to always learning from young people, right? Like, young people are the ones who are breaking apart the gender binary. I'm 41. So when I was 20 or 19 and coming out, we didn't have the lexicon of non-binary. We didn't have the lexicon of pansexual. So even in our spaces of liberation, we can create our own margins all the time. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to remember to grow and to evolve, because we've internalized so much of the mechanism of the state and our own traumatized histories that we pass on and pass forward. I'm just constantly trying to learn with all of you. And so when you center Black and indigenous transgender people, particularly those who are male assigned, what becomes so unequivocally illuminated is the way that so many children in our communities are raped in their homes and in their blood families, but then also in the institutions that are supposedly set up to help individual survivors find healing and justice, right? Because to Ahmad's point, when we follow the path that is laid out for white cisgender female survivors, what we are told as survivors is, in order to find justice, you must report to a police officer, and then you must prosecute the person who raped you and put them under the jail if you can, and then go to therapy with a stranger, likely a white woman because of who gets access to graduate school programs of social work, and that somehow talking to that white woman who's a stranger once a week, perhaps for the rest of your life in private, is going to help you get free. And that is a lie. I think that we all can imagine or understand that. Certainly that is not what led to my own liberation, right? My liberation has come from organizing work and resistance work, mostly with young people. I was a paid youth organizer in Brooklyn Public Schools for 12 years, and it is Black children across the Black diaspora, especially from the Caribbean, because Brooklyn, who were queer and trans, who were searching with me for words to name our visions for liberation. And the Caribbean is a special place where not my direct lineage, but my people, broadly speaking, have been mixing with yours for many generations, and that's a complicated history that we can talk about some other time. What I will say about the deep trust that 60 people who interviewed with me one-on-one have entrusted me with to show the composite story that starts to emerge around marginality and recentering that margin, trying to illuminate all of these different layers of oppression. To give you a sense, there are 60 storytellers in Mirror Memoirs across 15 different states. 70% of them are transgender, non-binary, or intersex. 42% of them are across the Black diaspora, including 2 folks who grew up in Africa and were raped as children in Africa and then emigrated here, including several folks who grew up in Caribbean island nations and were raped there and then emigrated here, and then including a lot of folks who are descendants of enslaved people in the United States, or the land now called the United States. And I think a lot about why it is that so many times when I would turn on that, it's not a tape recorder, but I'm middle-aged, right? So the tape recorder, I would hear again and again and again, I've never told anyone this before. There have been Black-run rape crisis centers for many generations. There have been Black-run anti-violence events and centers. And this is not about blame, because let me be clear, 10% I think it's actually higher than that. I think it's closer to 25 or 30% of survivors in the archive are also South Asian. And they also said, I've never said this before. So my own people are also talking to me, to be clear. But I hadn't really expected so many people outside of my direct ethnic community to say yes, often when they were complete strangers, right? They were a friend of a friend, or they saw a Facebook post, or they saw an Instagram post. And why is it that they're not accessing other spaces, right? And what are the truths that our composite stories sort of shine back at us uncomfortably? And I will say that when I first came out as a survivor, and I was put into group therapy by the state with other teenage girls from my county in northern New Jersey who were incest survivors who had had state intervention, I truly believed, as a kid who had been raped over 400 times by my dad, that rape was something that people with penises did to people with vaginas, right? And it wasn't until my dad disclosed to me that he also was raped as a child, which was sort of during when our family was trying to hold him accountable and keep him free from state violence, things got really complicated really quickly, because I didn't know what to do with that. I was 13, right, when all of this intervention and reconciliation was trying to happen, and I was like, oh God, you're wounded too? I do not want to hold that for you, right? But you need to go somewhere with that, and where was I supposed to send a man like that for healing, right? We don't have a place to send a man like that for healing. But then I started to understand the picture is so much more complex when you center children. To Ignacio's point, 9% of adults in Mirror Memoirs were raped or sexually assaulted by a cisgender woman, usually within their family. So I think we need to have conversations around the marginality of our language or our lexicon when it comes to sexual violence, around what, you talked about this too, Ignacio, what do we even mean when we say rape? Because rape can happen to people with penises, it does. Rape can happen by people with vaginas. It does, right? This is not an issue of a unidirectional arrow of harm from cisgender men towards cisgender women and girls. And in fact, Mirror Memoirs was built entirely upon this statistic that came out when I was at the end of Secret Survivors, and I thought I was moving on with my life. That was cute. I did that work to end child sexual abuse, and now I'm moving across the country and getting a different job. And The statistic came out after the film was created and it was wrapped and the toolkit was printed and we were done, and it completely complicated the whole project because it was a statistic from the American Academy of Pediatrics, so not a radical data source. We all agree, right? And it came out in 2012, and it said that gender nonconformity is actually a risk factor for being raped or sexually assaulted in childhood. Okay? So that means for everyone in here who's ever asked yourself, am I queer because I was raped as a kid? Am I trans because I was raped as a kid? Like, please let me just restore your grace and your dignity, right? We are targeted because we are gender nonconforming in childhood. Even the American Academy of Pediatrics thinks that's true. But I know it because that's what happened to me. I was a very gender nonconforming child. And what happens to gender nonconforming children is we are punished in our families, usually before we're ever raped by someone. Some person, often our mothers, tells us, you cannot be that way. You're going to get grounded, you're going to get shamed, you're going to get punished, you're maybe going to get beaten by your own mother or by a cisgender woman in your family because your gender nonconformity is just too visible, right? That's a really common story in mirror memoirs. So there's something around the violence of cisgender women and the way that cisgender women play into patriarchy and the generational history of rape and sexual violence that we need to take a hard and uncomfortable and painful look at. If we really want to end all forms of sexual violence, like these slogans that we have are cute, right? That we're going to end sexual violence in one generation. We have a lot of work to do right now if we're going to end all forms of sexual violence in one generation, right? To me, we can end sexual violence, but it is an intergenerational project because that shit is so deeply interwoven into every value that we collectively hold as a society, right? And I think in addition, and I'll close this opening soon because there's just too much to say and I want to give everyone time, but I think when we think about the way that we leave people out, again, to your point, Ignacio, where can people go to heal when they are transgender women and when they are effeminate men who might still identify as men? That American Academy of Pediatrics statistic or study not only found that gender nonconforming children in general are up to 6 times likelier to be raped or sexually assaulted, and the mainstream statistic from the CDC is 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. So already we're just talking about 20% of Americans. That's about 42 million Americans were raped or sexually assaulted as a child. We're saying for gender nonconforming kids, it's up to 6 times likelier. And those who are male assigned at birth are actually the most at risk. So when we talk about gender-based violence, we need to be centering children who are labeled boys when they are born and in some way show their gender nonconformity, because actually they are the most vulnerable to experience sexual violence than any of us. And that is still true in adulthood. Look at the murder rates of Black and Indigenous and Latinx transgender women. The life expectancy of a Black trans woman, and I'm not trying to speak for you, I'm actually just trying to honor all of the Black trans women who entrusted me with their stories in Mirror Memoirs. The life expectancy of Black trans women is 35 years old. And where are the spaces for them to join us in healing? Where are the shelters that are open to them, right? We need to do so much better, and that's what I think of when I think about marginality. I think about oppression, and I think about the ways we've created boxes that don't serve us when we're really trying to fight for liberation.
So I want to begin with Aishah, and quote Aishah, and I want us all to kind of quote with her. "This space is sacred." Can we say it back? This space is sacred. This space is sacred. She begins, oh, okay, yeah. This space is sacred. So my journey, I can't but not talk about my relationship with Aishah for the last 21 years, and being on the set of No as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of No, because this is my journey in the movement, and you could see right now by saying that this space is sacred, and all the learning that's happening in this room right now of how amazing of a beginning that was for me in the movement. I began with Aishah, not only in No, but I was a set photographer. I was 19, 20 at the time. And to be not only, Aishah trusting me as a junior in college and value my new beginnings as an artist, but to just be in that space with amazing scholarship and survivorship at the same time, and how people were weaving in and out of those spaces, and how people were, when a testimony, someone shared a testimony, and other people were triggered in the space, how we held each other, right? And I have that feeling, all at the same time, that the Black feminism at its core, in my beginnings, have stayed with me forever. I have not left this movement ever since. And so I just want to thank you, Aishah, not only thank you, but also seeing what we couldn't see. Me and Aishah didn't even have, I didn't even do SOARs yet. And you trusted me to be interviewee with my sister, and you saw something that we just didn't see. So I thank you so much for always seeing that, like seeing and trusting me to be on this panel today, and being on this long journey with you. So it's very emotional being in this space, because, there's so many people that have supported our work over the years and continue to support this, what it really means to do this work for so long. The care that you need, the energy that you need, the anger that you need. And so just seeing people here from the very beginning and people that are constantly inspiring me is a tremendous weight. I now want us to tap into, like as I tapped into my emotion, which I'm a highly emotional person, but tap now into our anger. Because when we talk about being at the margins, I hold, and I knew today, I have to bring our Black girls into this space. And that weight, that accountability is enormous, because they're just trying to be them. But at the heart, what we have learned, if we center them in our work in every way, we're going to get closer and closer to freedom. So I have to bring them into this space, and I have to bring us to the outrage of leaving them out. And I want us to, I hate to mention his name, but I actually want to break it down. I wrote down R. Kelly, because I feel like I still haven't had that real conversation yet about what it means to hold accountability in that way. Why the focus? Why him for a second? And I think that just talks about the margins of Black women and girls in the sexual assault, and particularly bringing us to the present. So R. Kelly is not about R. Kelly. We all know that R. Kelly is not about R. Kelly, right? R. Kelly is really about the systems that have created R. Kelly to exist, and how we have all played roles. And I want to just name the systems, right? Because I really think that's what it's about, being at the margins. And for me, the biggest lesson in terms of doing this work, particularly centering Black girls in this work, and why I think it's the hardest work of my life, right? I thought doing the sexual assault work in terms of Black women, but particularly Black girls, has just been the hardest work, because we have to transform, and I say this a lot, but we have to transform all their systems around you. And I think if we look and deconstruct the R. Kelly situation, we could kind of see what those systems are. So with R. Kelly, our schools have failed our girls, right? Our schools. We're dealing with child sexual marriage in United States. If we talk about Aaliyah, right? We are dealing with domestic violence, sexual assault, celebrityism in our community. We're dealing with kidnapping. Yeah. Now, 33% of the reported missing cases are Black girls. Where is the fucking outrage? I mean, I can't think of a population where 33% are missing, are missing, and there's no outrage, right? Child pornography. And misogyny in hip hop, and then there's the lack of what it means to really center Black women and girls in the movement. I really think we just dealt with all of that. We have real conversations, and there's so many more. I'm sure there's so many more. There's sex trafficking, if we just take all of that apart and dealt with that, I think we get closer and closer to the truth as it was told earlier.
Let me throw out two questions, and feel free to take either or both. One is just how you all have talked about children, right, and centering children, coming up with a new vocabulary, and I was thinking of just in your own work or in your own life. How do you combat the kind of violence perpetuated against children, right? And still open up a space for children's sexuality to flourish, right? Because in the culture at large, we have this such narrow, myopic sense of children as one, that's a culture that exploits and hypersexualizes children, or projects this fantasy of purity, innocence that adults covet, right? All of us as children have a much more complex reality than this glib sense of purity and innocence that's always deposited on us. So how do you still open up that space for, how do we come up with a new vocabulary for children themselves to trust their instincts, right? So that's one question. And the other is maybe around the question of our bodies, our flesh. And I was thinking of the way in which religious dogma, cisgender norms and laws, respectability politics conspire to force us to deny and distrust our flesh, which is a source of insight, a source of intelligence, a source of wisdom. So again, how do we open up that space to trust the flesh?
Okay, I'm just going to be quick and begin by talking about something I feel like I really value in terms of holding that idea of talking about consent and talking about sexual violence, but also holding play and joy in the movement. I think it's something that I'm learning to really tap into more and value. We do it, and these are it's very interesting because I have on social media, there are things I will post that I will never post because I don't think people will get this. One of the things that we do is have a twerking workshop, right? And I say I post and no post because our young girls are so sexualized, right? And we're trying to tap into what is that, the joys that they naturally have, right? Like they're twerking in the mirrors, they're enjoying sisterhood, and bringing those kind of moments of that have been happening. You said Afrocentric, yeah. We've been doing this as African dance. Like when I went to Jamaica, they were doing twerking there, right? And so it's seeing these different moments of Black girls play. Experience joy and are sexualizing with their bodies and moving and experiencing the sisterhood together. And so how do we create that and also bring that as their care, as they're doing workshops about consent, as they're learning about sexual assault, as they're learning, as I see Aishah's film, No, when we screened it this summer, right? So balancing those two, but I'm very protective of those spaces. And so I think it's how to incorporate that in our movement more and value the things working with children, play is the window to a child's mind, but also play is the closest to freedom. And so when you play, and And I think that's a spaces I think we need to create more and more, like being in this, that's what gives us the joy and continue to do this work. So I think it's finding that balance, like what is care, what is self-care really? And tapping in and watching what children do naturally and incorporating that into our work.
I think yes to the vision of children and their liberation and us all being able to heal our own inner child. I want to speak to the ways that we oppress children in ways that I think are very concrete ways we can shift this, right? So like within the nation state, children are still considered property, like still, right? And even in a pre-colonial context, right? I have the great privilege of knowing what exact precise culture my people come from. And let me tell you, that's not necessarily a source of calm or ease or salve for me, because in my people's tradition, when you go back 2,200 years, there's a codification in Hinduism, and it's called the Code of Manu. And it says that when a girl child is born, or a child who's assigned female at birth, right? They don't use that term, but let's be precise in our modern context, that child is the property of her father. And that when she becomes of menstrual age, then her father has the right to marry her off to whoever he wants, and that she is then the property of her husband, and that should she outlive her husband but have a son, she is then the ward of her oldest son. Okay, white people didn't teach us that. Unfortunately, I wish to God I could blame all of my intergenerational oppression on white people. And let me be clear, I mean, I'm the descendant of freedom fighters in India, and my ancestors who resisted the British and Portuguese were sexually tortured in prison. My grandmother has entrusted me with those stories. So I'm not saying that white people didn't do us great and egregious harm, but I'm saying we were harming ourselves before they ever got to our shores, right? So I think that there's actually an opportunity, a very painful one, but a real opportunity for all of us in a post-colonial and post-slavery, post-settler colonization, post-nation-state context to really be more liberated than perhaps even our ancestors were, right? What would it look like to give children the room to not be our property, but for us to be the ones who are stewards for their care, right? For us to create a society in which children can reveal to us in every sense of their being who they are. We gender children in utero, right? We do these gender reveal parties that are so oppressive and offensive to me. How do you know what gender your child is until your child tells you? I sit with transgender person after transgender person who says to me, yes, I was visibly gender nonconforming as a child, and yes, I was beaten and raped for it. We do that to our children. So you want to talk about liberating our children? I would like us to reimagine a society in which we honor our children as whole beings who come into this world through the portals of our bodies and are there to show us the way forward to a better society. And I know we can do that, but we have to start by that basic level of like, we don't know our children till they tell us who they are.
So I am going to share like what I've done personally with my own child. So I wrote one word down. I wrote deprogramming. That's what I did with my daughter. The way I learned, because it was all trial and error. I didn't have, the manual or anything. And as many people know that when you are a survivor and you get pregnant, that's some shit. That is some deep stuff. Even just saying it now just makes me want to cry because it's so intense. It is so intense to carry a child and not know, what's going to happen, and me thinking that I would harm my own child, and it was just, and being suicidal the first couple of years of her life, and not understanding how I was going to raise this child, how I was even going to keep it together. And so that in and of itself was just horrific. And so I think at about age 3 or 4, when I think I was probably driving her crazy because I was like constantly like, where are you going? Come here, sleep with me. She was sleeping with me in the room. And I used to say I'm protecting her, but really it wasn't that. It was like I wanted her near me. She was helping me as much as I was doing the same for her. And so I got scared one day and I was like, I'm gonna drive my child crazy. I'm gonna just make her a scared person. And I don't want her to be a scared person. I wanna teach her about the things, but I don't wanna scare her. And so I thought about what that could be. And what I did was, I told her the truth. I talked to her very, very truthfully, openly, and honestly, and of course, age appropriately. We know what our kids can handle and how we can talk to them and stuff. And, and a lot of times when she told me things that I was super uncomfortable with, inside of my body, I mean, most people who know that when you are, I could say I'm having a full-on anxiety attack right now, and I could be sitting down like this. And nobody knows, but inside I'm like, oh my God! I'm just like going crazy inside, And my daughter can tell me these things, and inside I am like, oh my God, what can I say? What could I say? What could I do? This is horrible. She's telling me about the first time she took off her panties and humped with another girl in her room, And she's telling me like, I got something really cool to tell you, Mommy. Let me tell you. Because when she was little, she was like, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. I want to be a lesbian, right? And I told her, that's real sweet, baby, but lesbianism isn't a job or a career or anything like that. I said, but it's good, right? That's right. But maybe it is, right? But I knew what she was trying to say. Like, she loved me and she wanted to be like me. So when she told me, when her friend came over and they were in the room, and then when she left, she's telling me how they humped each other, I was like, everything started flowing. I was like, oh my God, they're gonna think that I'm teaching my daughter this shit, and now she's doing it to another kid, and they're gonna tell me, and I was just like, inside, I'm thinking all these things, but I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. How did it feel? And she's like, it was good, it was good. And I was like, how was it good? Tell me, why was it good? And so she started talking about things that wasn't even pertaining to things that I was thinking about. To her, it's like, she's my friend. She has a cool doll, and she's it's like nothing. They were just looking at each other and just exploring. And she was like, I really like her. And I was like, okay. And we talked about that, and I said, that could feel really, really good. That's something you could do by yourself, too. And then we actually had a multi-conversation that went on for weeks about lesbophobia. Like, I had to talk to her about what other people might think. So I was like, this is beautiful, and you're telling me, and I think it's awesome. I said, and you might tell this person, and that person might think it's really wrong, and you might tell that person, and they might think it's cool, So I'm telling her about different ways that different people will react, and how she can respond, and how she could always come to talk to me. And rather than telling her, you can always come to me, I just showed her. I never had to say that to her. I just showed her. That's it. Anytime she came to talk, I talked to her. When I didn't know an answer, I was like, I have no idea, but we're gonna figure it out. Yeah. And I think that parents today feel like they have to have the answer to everything, or I think half the time we're scared because we don't know, and we're trying to make it right. And I'm thinking about how we talk about, like when we talk about black parents and white parents, right? When I remember when my daughter was going to school, she was in a predominantly white school. She was one of 2 black girls in that school. And the reason she was in that school was because she was in an all-black school, which we all know was horrible. It was just like the teachers were overworked, underpaid, horrible, no books, and literally the guidance counselor told me, take her out of this school because she's gonna fall through the cracks. And what that meant going into a white school, right? And so she's in this school, and why was I telling the story? I completely forgot.
Children and sexuality and liberation.
So, yes. Oh, yeah, so I'm thinking about getting on the train with her, going to the school. Thank you, baby. This is middle age. Okay. Going to the train and seeing how white children were behaving with their parents or even their nannies and stuff, yelling and doing all this stuff. And I remember always saying to her, you better never talk to me that way. We have respect for one another. And one of the things was I also have much respect for my daughter. I didn't yell at my daughter. I didn't curse at her. I didn't talk to her in a demeaning way because I don't like when people talk to me that way. So I showed her, and she always knew she could come to me. And I created a lot of ways for her to talk to me because we often wait for children to come to us, and we have to create those. We have to we have to constantly be thinking of new, creative, innovative ways to engage our children, and we have forgotten that. We have definitely forgotten that because we're too busy, because the world is too crazy. There's so much stuff going on. We are surviving so many things. We are navigating so many things. And when it comes to our children, we're like, well, they're in school, they're good, they're getting an education. That's how I grew up. My mother never checked my homework. The only thing she ever checked was my report card. And that doesn't make her a bad parent. She was busy. She had 3 kids and she was doing a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So it's really rethinking about how we are engaging with our children and also how we're deprogramming them. Because what they're learning in school is crap. History is crap. It is no good. And so a lot of us don't have the opportunity to homeschool or anything like that. So when they're in that school, we need to be asking what the hell they're learning and then deprogram them, because everything she learned, we're talking about Columbus and this and that, holidays, all that crap. I'm like, so that's what they teach you there. I'm going to teach you this. And in addition to that, I'm going to teach you how other people in other parts of the world do it too. Never did I just censor it here, because she needs to know how that my way is not the way. I'm giving her information. She can take that information if she wants to, right? And that's the way I taught her about sex as well. The way I changed that with her was, when I grew up, it was you'll meet a man, you'll get married, you fall in love, all that stuff. With her, I was like, have lots of wonderful, beautiful sex. Don't get married if you want to. If you want to get married, wait. You want to experience life, date. Go out there, explore life, travel, do all of it. And then when you've done that for several years, then you could think about it, and stuff. I did the opposite. I said, I want you to experience. I want you to have connections. I want you to be able to make comparisons. I want you to understand life, right? Because when we do the thing where it's like, I meet my first person and there it is, it's my life partner. If that's the case, I am so happy for you, because that is rare, right? And the real world is that, and when I think about relationships, the real world is that very few of us have the love of our lives that we're with, you meet the person. Most of us will have relationship after relationship, and that's part of life. There's nothing wrong with it. We are a part of this thing where it's like, find love, and if you don't find it, something's wrong with you. Or find the right love, heterosexual, something is wrong with you, right? There's nothing wrong. You get to craft. If we were able to craft and navigate our own ways of life and love and sex, it would be very, very different, right? My daughter has a different way of being and experiencing life, and my daughter's my best friend, and we're still this close, and she tells me everything about her life, and I do the same with her. And I'm so glad that I could truly say that I have my daughter's back and my daughter has my back, and she knows everything about me, and she continues to learn, and I continue to learn with her, because one major thing that I wish my mom and my dad would have did with me was show some vulnerability. They were so strong all the time, it's just like, we're working and we're taking care of you, and that said, the emotional piece was kind of lacking, and I understand it. So it's not demonizing them. I totally understand it. But we do have to shift that. We have to shift that thing. We're doing it together. If we're talking about family, if we're talking about intergenerational, if we're talking about children, our future and stuff, then let's walk the walk. Actually, let me change that. Let's do it, right? I don't want to use ableist language. Let's do it. Let's just freaking do it, because we keep talking about it, but we're not actually moving forward. And I think for some people it's because we don't have the tools, but that's what I'm trying to create right now. I have some tools and I want to share that with y'all. And I'll just pitch to, on YouTube, I have a show with my daughter called Pure Love Talks, and it's its 2nd season. And we have a conversation about how I raised her and talk about all types of topics. And we don't script it or anything. We just pick a topic and we sit and talk in front of it. And we just talk about it for real. We talk about the good stuff, the messed up stuff, whatever, because it's real. We want to talk about the messiness in the real life, because it's not perfect. I have messed up and fallen, and I've gotten up, and I'm going to continue to fall. And so if we show that vulnerability to our children, then our children understand that they can also be vulnerable, and we can have some sort of a better relationship. And if we have a better relationship with the first people that we non-consensually had a relationship with in our lives, then we could actually learn how to consensually have very good relationships with other people.
So sitting here thinking about my response, I would say it's much like this one in the sense of dismantling. I'm stuck on the word of education because I believe that this world has a perception and an idea about who I am, about why I'm here, how I exist, and the way that I move through life. And when you get to know me personally, you'll probably find all that stuff is not true. I have struggled for a long time trying to understand the promises of this world, understanding the promises of this country, the promises of my family that I was hurt and let down by. And every day trying to navigate and figure out. I'm a preacher's kid, so I also come from a very deep spiritual side of things. And my faith is the literal foundation of my life. And I remember struggling with that because I knew that I loved the Lord. I knew that I accepted him and that I said he died for my sins. But then I also had this whole church and this whole world of spiritual people that would tell me that I'm going to hell and that I shouldn't be and that I didn't deserve the life. And how dare me come and sit next to the pew on the mother. And, you know, how dare me have happy birthdays and happy holidays and all the things that are afforded to life and people that are particularly not identified as trans, non-binary, or gender nonconformist. And I struggled because I know scripture, and I know that the word says that love covers a multitude of sins. And I know that my Savior told me that he honors those who just cry out to him and that he would be there for them. But then I have a leader, a church pastor or a bishop or someone who tells me that my very being is a one-way trip to hell. And I struggle with that because I also then remember that this is a person. And I think about the stories, the priests, the elders, the leaders that we hear of every day that commit the heinous acts that my population are accused of, and that my community, these things are perpetuated on my community all the time, when really it's the complete opposite. It's the Boy Scouts that rape. It's the priests that rape. It's Uncle Tommy in the black family that no one wants to talk about that rapes and that goes through picking who he wants throughout the family. But I'm the freak, and I'm the pervert, and I'm the sexual deviant. And it's actually further from the truth. Because of my relationship with Christ, I've chosen to keep myself restrained from a lot. There's a lot of spaces that I don't go into. There's a lot of people that I don't talk to. I have a very good sense of discernment. I can talk to you and know that you're on BS. And that is because of my relationship with Christ. And I struggle with anybody who would tell me that that relationship is not real, that it is not a palpable thing, because I know the things that I've been through, and I know the things that change when I put the Lord into them. So for someone to tell me what I cannot come to and what I have no right to, I would argue, I wouldn't care if it was Mother Teresa, I would call her a lie right to her face. Because if you're telling me that, then you're essentially calling God a liar. And the word said that God is not a man that he should lie, neither the Son of Man that he should repent. So if you choose to call God a liar, then you got a fight on your hands that I want nothing to do with. But that also gives me the strength to continue to push. So when I think about education, I think about speaking truth to power. We always hear about knowledge to power. Knowledge is okay. I can sit here and talk to this whole auditorium until I'm blue in the face. But if you don't receive the truth of what I'm saying in your heart and in your spirit, then you won't be transformed. You'll walk out of this auditorium, and I'll be another voice that you heard on the program. So what I do is I speak truth and knowledge everywhere. And I've been afforded the opportunities. I know that this is my purpose-driven work. I know that I'm walking right in line with what the Lord wants me to do because the things that I do align perfectly. I don't stress. I don't have a plan. I don't run back to my hotel room and say I got to call and email this person and I got to write that person and I got to show up here and show up there. I commit to waking up to being a good person. I commit to saying my prayers before my hoof touch the floor. I commit to always stopping and acknowledging people because the word also tells us that we don't know who Christ is. So Christ can come to me in the coffee shop and I can turn around and be a rude bitch to Christ. So I am intentionally attentive. I am intentionally attentive about who I talk to, who I connect with, about every moment moving through life because you never know who someone is. And I'm always encouraged because the Lord has, the people running for president, the highest office in the land, they come to Detroit or send their people to connect with me. And I'm just a trans woman from the D, you know? I'm just pushing through and doing what I gotta do to make life better for generations of people because I know the things that I've been through. I know the hurts, the pains, the hurdles, the barriers, the ups and the downs. So I also want to do my part to make sure that I do that. In that, I also pay my tithes. I also am good to people. I also speak life into myself and encourage myself in a way that only I can do. I don't leave that in the hands of a bishop or a pastor because if I have my own relationship, then I also can pick myself up out of the ditch that I find myself in because that's the power that I hold being a child of God. So that's the way I move through life. I'm not scared, but I know the fight that's in front of me, and I know that I can't go at it alone. So I always take, my spiritual, makeup, like my Christ makeup, because I know that that's it for me. And I know that the world would have a hard time believing and understanding and dissecting that. But I don't look for the time to try and do that because I know that my purpose is that one that is blessed. And the people that I'm supposed to be connected and speak with throughout this life, I will. And I don't have to try to do those things because my steps are ordered.
Let the church say amen. Wow, there's a lot to sit with, but thank you. I think a lot has been said about children. I think I don't have much to add on that point, apart from viewing children as thinking persons who have things to say, who see and watch everything we do, and who are keeping a good record. I like the way Toni Morrison, again, may she rest in peace, said in one of her latest books, God Help the Child, what you do to children matters, and they may never forget it. And I know that's most certainly been true in my own life. And I can just think about the times I was told to stay in a child's place or to be quiet and to, just let the adults talk. And you listen, right? But what does it mean to create spaces where children are allowed to speak freely? And so I actually love Ignacio's YouTube show. I actually think all of you should check it out. And as someone who eventually wants to have children, it's quite a nice example of what feminist parenting can look like. And so I'm really thankful and appreciative of that roadmap. I wanted to comment, because you did bring up flesh, and in the spirit of the panel, I think where religion has been touched on all day in various iterations. And I think we can't get away from the reality that much of how we think about sexuality and gender is very much in tune with religion in the United States and across the diaspora. Even if one does not identify with a religious tradition, religion undergirds patriarchy and all of these systems of domination. And I couldn't, you used the word flesh, and I've been thinking about it for quite some time now. You didn't say body, but you said flesh. And so it reminds me of Hortense Spiller's, there's a line in Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, also another piece that people should read and sit with, where, Hortense Spiller's, as priestess, essentially says, before the body there is flesh. And so there's something about the certain kinds of violations and brutality that happens to the flesh that makes it a body, and the body becomes something that can be used for labor and production. And so what does it mean to recover the flesh? What does it mean to sit with our flesh, to love our flesh, thinking of Morrison, beloved? What does it mean to honor flesh? And so for me, coming up in the Pentecostal tradition, I heard over and over, in this flesh dwells no good thing. And that it is our duty and our responsibility to crucify this flesh, and to resurrect with Christ, and to live as if we don't exist in a body, and exist as if we don't have flesh and have fleshly desires. Even the language itself is interesting in light of lynching and sexual violence. So there's a whole history here that I don't know if we have fully reckoned with. I don't think we can get away. I know people have every right to move away from religious traditions that are violent and death-dealing, but the reality is that we cannot end, and I'll say this over and over, we cannot end sexual violence until we reckon with where these ideas and these theologies, where they came from. And so it's not always even from white people. There is a lot of theologizing that's happened from Black people. And so I wanted to just think through one of the initiatives we do at Children of Combahee. We work with preachers to do sermon workshops around biblical texts that explore rape. And so one of them is the story of Esther. I remember growing up in the church, and Esther, that scripture is used very prominently on Women's Day. And it's the irony of the story. The irony of the story is that we jump over chapter 1 and go to chapter 2, and in chapter 3, and Esther is in her queendom, right? She's royalty, but we miss the harem. We miss the captivity. And so we actually gather a room of preachers to go with chapter 1 and move slowly through chapter 1. And then they have to preach a sermon, a 5-minute sermon based on a piece of the text. And what we will find is that you find the church mother is in that text. The church mother is the one that's grooming little Esther to be in the harem, right? She's grooming little Esther on how to cover her body so you don't tempt deacon so-and-so. And then we have to deal with brother Mordecai, who is Esther's uncle, who literally escorts her to the harem. He escorts her, and then the Bible says that he came back day and night to watch the harem. So he knew what was happening in the harem and did nothing to save Esther. And then we have the eunuch, who is an individual, some biblical scholars say is a queer person or an asexual person or a transgender person, who is also both a harm doer and is a survivor. And so all of these dynamics are playing out in the biblical text. And so I'm just thinking about how our communities have tools, but we don't know how to use the tools that we have. We have the materials, but we skip over the materials that are going to get us to liberation. And then we misquote. We talk about how you're going to hell and this, that, and the other. So I guess I'm rambling for a little bit here, but I want to think about very explicitly the paradox of you talked about hell, and hell theology is so fascinating to me, in part because it comes out of enslavement, if we don't know that white folks conjured up rapture and hell theology in the late 18th century to get black folks to be afraid of leaving the plantation, and that theology literally comes to the present day, and we're sending gay folks to hell and trans folks to hell and all these people, but then the hell theology doesn't work for the rapist. It doesn't work for the child molester. It doesn't work for those persons. So you're still going to heaven, and all these survivors are going to hell. So which God do you really serve, right? This is the question. And and I'll shut up here and I'll leave it here, but this is a question I raise at every panel I'm on for folks to really sit with. Does God need consent? And I think it's a question that is important to reckon with, because it actually unravels the way that we privilege this white, cis, heteropatriarchal God who allows you, who gives you authority to rape people and to be violent and to be misogynistic and to be racist. And so when we actually sit with God and who this God you have constructed is, I think we actually might get somewhere. So thank you.
We started out 15 minutes late. Do we have 4 minutes just to take questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. We have 4 minutes left, so we may not get a chance, the panelists may not get a chance to answer your questions, but please, if you have that question, maybe we can hear the question in the 4 minutes that we have left.
We have a test. They're going to tell us their questions, and we're going to talk to them outside, I'm sure, like the other panels. Yeah.
Thank you.
You would take it in that.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to deeply thank Amita for their testimony on the complexities of dealing with child sexual abuse as a gender nonconforming person and also as an immigrant. I want to thank you for that work. But I also want to ask you, conscious of being a non-Black person in this Black-centered space, that if you have ever considered, you mentioned the anti-Blackness of our communities. If you've ever considered that you cannot speak about either sexual abuse or even anti-Blackness in our communities without talking about the issues of caste and religion. And whether, and I think that, I think I'm conscious of the way I'm putting it here, so I'll be a little slow, but for example, you spoke about aligning your ancestors with the ancestors of the Black folks in this room. But it is likely, and I'm not saying that this is true, that us sitting here as Dalit women, we may have been enslaved by your ancestors. Right. How then will you align your ancestors with the ancestors of Black folks here? And so I just want to say that please consider also talking about the expansion and the complication of the South Asian identity. Thank you.
No, only one question, right? We'll take the other one.
But I feel like okay.
No, I agree completely. I've already thought about it gazillions of times.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Rebecca Johnson, and first I've had the honor to work with several JVC fellows, and it's really been an important part of my year this year. So Luz, Aishah, Ignacio, thank you for the work you're doing. I have a structural question. And you, Amita? Yes, you touched on it. And that is, an important part of the carceral state is social work. And part of social work is foster care. And mandated reporting. And in some of the sort of research I've done while having the opportunity to work with JBC fellows is talking to social workers who run big institutions who are like, oh no, we can't bring that kind of programming because we're mandated reporters. What if somebody says something? So, there's a way that it creates the silence. And I just want to think with other people and hear maybe over at the book signing what it is we need to do to start to undo that part of the carceral state.
Yes.
I think they should answer. Yeah, and that's it. No more questions. Okay.
So I just want to acknowledge my Dalit sisters in the room. Thank you for that question and comment. And I will just say to the large non-South Asian audience here, this is absolutely something I own and think about all the time. My ancestors are upper caste ancestors. They're Brahmin on 3 sides and Kshatriya on 1 side. I did not want to go into that complexity in a Black American slave-descended this context space, but I don't hide that about my ancestry at all, and I very much feel in right relationship with my Black comrades after being in this country for 50 years as a family, and have done a lot of work in our diaspora as well to educate upper caste descended youth in our diaspora. So I just wanted to say that, and I don't want to take up too much space in a diaspora that's very different from ours to talk about our own lineages, but I don't hide from that. So I just wanted to say that.
All right. So please help me. Was it in a the structural question? Does anyone want to answer? Well, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think an idea, and perhaps others can comment, but you were raising a question about programming and the fear of what does one do if someone discloses, if I'm hearing you correctly. I think a strategy that at least I've used when I've done workshops is to let people know, right? If it's especially if these are minors that are in the space, that you are required to report if something comes up. And I think it gives the minor the opportunity to decide on how they want to share their story. There are ways that and I think we don't give children enough credit for how they are thinking about these situations. And so they very well may say enough to give you a sense of what the hell is going on, but they may not say it all, so you don't report it to the police. And so you have to work with a community of people that are going to ensure that you get that child out of that situation without involving the police, for instance. But I know, yeah.
And I would also say trying to avoid the police, as he so truthfully stated. Sometimes the police can be very harmful and they don't understand. There's a nervous kind of fight and flight. And then Dr. Campbell, she did a report on what sexual assault and rape does to the nervous system. So you may not recall, you may not remember, things may be scattered, things may be thrown apart. And to a policeman, that can be viewed as a policeman or policewoman, that can be viewed as someone not telling the truth or being deceptive, and it often is like oppressed with personal bias from the officer of how everything went. So sometimes it's just good to maybe outsource and get an advocate where they're neutral, where they can just speak the facts and just be there for the survivor or the person that is making the complaint. I think as many people as you can talk to, considering the situation and the per situation, I think it would be best for you to make a team to go at it, because it might get heavy for you in particular somewhere down the line, and someone else may have a keynote that would be helpful for the work.
So I would like to talk to you further. I think one of the things when I'm talking about with Black girls and why it's so hard, and one of the other systems is the social service systems, right? It is incredibly hard for Alama Combe to find actual healers in this work to support our girls. And particularly, it's actually shocking that we're even thinking and considering the police as options at this point. I mean, this is the Black community, right? No, but I'm serious. And I just think it's the last result, right? Time and time, we have seen police come in terms of the mental health world and shoot people when the door is open, right? And so it's just shocking. I know that this is like a system that we are trained and thinking about. And so we've been interviewing social service workers, and that's the first thing and we're like, oh no. When we actually ask that question about like how they handle things, we know that that's not the person to work with our young people. Not saying that that isn't a situation, right? But it should be the last situation, because we know in terms of working with our community, that cannot be the solution. And so I'm happy to talk about and work with you about how we do go about that. How do we still do consensual, we say that we're mandated reporters, and how we really, really, really work with the community, right? Their best friend, their schools, the principals, the aunts, right? To really make sure that that child is safe. Yeah.
Can I just say, what everybody is describing is just the work, right? What mandated reporting does is like you come and you say, now it's reported, now it's out of my hair. It goes somewhere else. And so what not doing mandated reporting is actually doing like a lot more work that people either don't have the resources for, don't want to do, or just don't think that they have that's not any option to do. And so I think it's like we have an assembly line. It's like, I was hurt, tell that person, now I'm gonna tell you this, but let me take you out of the house. Now you do and it's a whole system. And then we have teams of people, like you said, talking to the aunties and the cousins and stuff. It's deep, deep work and commitment that a lot of people are not ready, willing, or able to do.
So,
outside of state, including social workers, doctors, nurses, and healers. So if you want to know more about that, there's like 3 of us here that could talk about it, but it's definitely moving, absolutely.
So for the live stream, yeah.
Kara Page and 3 other healers are in the room.
We're saying that there are a lot of people out who are doing this work, and that there are 3 of them here, Jey'nce Dixon, Daku Ta, and Kara Page, who'd be more than willing to talk about this, and we're going to be transitioning into the book launch. So I'm going to do something a little in the interest of time to just ask you all to just stay, because I don't want you moving and everybody start talking, to introduce John, and then, we're going to close out the conference, and then we can all hug and kiss. So, because we need hugs and kisses. So this has been incredible. This panel, let's first of all. And now I feel like, Salamisha opened up with roads leading to Philly, but I feel like now all roads are leading to Salamisha, because I know John Jackson because of Salamisha. I met John when he was also at Harvard, when it's like, the glory years there of all these radical Black scholar activists there. And so that was in 2099 when John had locks. Before Deborah Thomas, so before the Thomas Jackson power team. So let me just, as I said in the beginning, it took a village, but we would not be here in this room, in this school, without Dean John Jackson. So let's just give a hand of applause for him. From day one, from the moment that I sent an email and Liz followed, and I came here to meet with John in March of last year when he was at the School for Social Policy and Practice, he was like, I'm on it. I want to make this happen. And he did. He real support. He and Deborah Thomas, who is a professor of anthropology here, and also his wife. We're the power of 3 here, and then, others, many others. So I just want to give the official introduction and then let John take us home. And since we're doing church, bring us on home, John. So John Jackson is the Walter H. Annenberg Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication, the Richard Perry University Professor, and the co-director with Deborah Thomas of the Center for Experimental Ethnography at the University of Pennsylvania. He was previously Dean of the School of Social Policy and Practice and Special Advisor to the Provost on Diversity at Penn. His research examines ethnographic methods in media analysis, the impact of mass media on urban life, media making as a form of community building and knowledge production, globalization, and the remaking of ethnic racial diasporas, visual studies, urban anthropology, critical race theory, and ethnographic film. He's an award-winning filmmaker and a prolific author. And without further ado, Dean Jackson.
I do want to say very briefly that one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here and be dean is because the only reason why I imagined that this could be a place, this being the academy, that could accommodate the kind of things I wanted to do in the world would be if we completely reconceptualize what we mean by knowledge, and we create opportunities for spaces like this one, which weren't necessarily built for this conversation, to open up enough to not just accommodate it, but I think to produce an opportunity for sparks to fly so that we can reimagine in a way that connects our brains to our hearts exactly why it is we're here to begin with. And I feel like this day, if nothing else, being dean, now, when I was at SP2, for a lot of people, it made sense that we would connect. It was Penn Social Justice School. What we're putting out are social change agents. This was a question that social policy and practice was designed to help facilitate a conversation around. When I moved to Annenberg, well, one of the thoughts was, well, clearly, can't move to Annenberg with you. But one of the themes I heard over and over, and I'll be very brief, over and over again today, is an idea that's central to communication as a field. And it's a question of how you change behavior. What changes behavior at the individual level and at the collective level? And there's a version of what you all are demanding of us that's about figuring out how do we begin a conversation that says it's not enough to lament all of the misery we've had to withstand up to this point, but this has to lead to fundamental cultural change. And I do feel like, if nothing else, I got a lot individually that we're going to take back into the classrooms here. We're going to think about critically as a community that I know will allow us to be one small, tiny component of what I know is a transnational, global attempt to end this. Yes. I mean, sometimes these social problems, they feel so big, so vast, they seem like there's no way to ever solve them. Right? And I always tell people we're a very smart species. Right? If this stuff was easy, we would have figured it out millennia ago. But it's hard, it's intractable. But these issues, no matter how deep-seated, no matter how baked into what we imagine our social and political and cultural worlds to be, we have to still be optimistic that we have the tools, even if it means developing a new lexicon, new conceptual categories, to unlearn them and to create a world that we want to inhabit. That's just, that's fair, that's inclusive. I just want to thank you all for bringing this conversation here, for allowing us to host it. On behalf of the entire Annenberg School, and folks worked so hard, up and down, to make this happen. And one name I know you heard several times today, although she's very quiet, doesn't say a lot, although you mentioned you called at 7 a.m. this morning about making sure, is Deborah Williams, who I know is someone who might not even be in the room now, but this would not have happened without her working day in and day out to make sure this could work. So I want to thank Deborah. I want to thank the rest of the Penn community. I want to thank you all for being willing. I mean, these kind of conversations are so hard, right? Because especially at a place like this, we think, well, we have to do them in sort of hyper-rationalist way, and they can't be affect and emotion. But if we're going to be serious, anytime we open our mouths to talk about this stuff, there's going to be gnashing of teeth. Right? It's going to be difficult. And you all were able to, I think, model a form of serious, critical, rigorous, engaged discussion that was full-bodied, that was enfleshed, as well as in mind, that I really think was transformative. So thank you for that. And I want to end by thanking Aishah.